Picture hit her first ER visit. Yes, we did. Yes. It was, over at my wife's her sister's house. You know, fast kids jumping on the couch thing. Don't. Yeah. They fixed it with a hair tie. They call it some staples. It's blue. They sort of braided it, pulled it together. It apparently didn't look that bad. My wife said hers. It didn't look that bad there, but I guess the rest of the page, I'm like actually started to like tear. Sounds good. Yeah. Right. I'm sure. Yep.
Okay, good evening, everyone. At this time, I'm going to get started and call this meeting to order. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us in our City Commission tonight meeting this evening, and I'd like to invite you to join us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Thank you for that. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. And at this time, I would like to say that I would like to make an amendment to agenda item number 6 to make it for interviews only this evening and postpone voting on the appointment until our next meeting. Our personnel committee has chosen 3 really qualified, great candidates, and I'd like to give myself and my fellow commissioners time to truly process all the information we are about to get and we have been given. So I'd like to make that amendment. And, does anybody have any comment on that, or do you want me to make a motion?
Do we need to make a motion?
Need to make it, John? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Just in agreement?
Yeah, I support that. I mean, as a member of the Personnel Committee, I've already had a chance to meet with all of our candidates, and so I'm probably feeling maybe a little more ready than some other people on the commission might be, but it's an important decision, and so I definitely support the idea of taking more time to consider this information. Or Mr. Huff would remind us that we do need to make sure that when it comes to actual deliberations, that we're doing that in open meetings in accordance with the Open Meetings Act, and I know that we're all committed to doing that.
Yeah, I would concur. I think certainly out of respect for our 3 candidates, making sure that whatever decision we make is the decision that reflects best on the city and gives them the time that is due to them in those decisions, and isn't just something that's rushed because we want to make sure we get that tonight. I support that.
I agree.
Any other comments? Any other adjustments to the agenda? No? Okay. All right, so now at this time we move on to public comment. And public hearings are noted in parentheses if you have copies of the agenda in front of you. So at this time, if you're here to speak on an agenda item that does not require a public hearing, such as items 6, 7, and 8, or if you're here to speak on an issue that's not on the agenda, please come forward now. Is there anybody here? Please state your name and address, please.
Good evening, I'm Emily Beggs from 1649 Seminole Road. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you for a statement. I'm here to provide a brief statement in response to the new flashing pedestrian light located at the Lake Drive and Bagley Avenue intersection. Excuse me. After speaking with several community individuals and reviewing feedback from the Traffic Safety Coalition, the overall response has been positive. There is appreciation for the effective means to alert traffic to pedestrians in the crosswalk. It works jointly with the lighted crossing guard already in place and appears effective outside of the crossing guard hours. One point brought up was the placement of the button in order to activate the lights and the lack of education or announcement of the new light to the public. There was also an increase in hope that this same type of light may be placed at other locations, specifically the Hall Street and Lake Grove intersection, as well as the crosswalk in front of the library. We feel that the library crosswalk is definitely worth a look. It is a high pedestrian and a high vehicle traffic area with not only students and our neighbors, but individuals coming in and out of East Grand Rapids on the bus routes and visiting the library and community center. One final point raised, but not necessarily related to the flashing lights, is a growing concern with the middle school drop-off and pickup times traffic and those related traffic issues. I realize this may not necessarily be a direct public safety issue and may be possibly more of a school-related issue, but I said that I would mention it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any public comment to make? No? Okay, so now, oh, I'm sorry. Please state your name and address,
Sure.
please.
Tom Tillman, 1635 Hall Street, Southeast. I know we all know it snowed Saturday night and Sunday night, and I took the opportunity yesterday afternoon and evening as I was going around the city to take some photos. I wasn't able to put a PowerPoint together for you, but I'll just call your attention to some things. And I don't mean to condemn anyone, criticize, complain about anything. I'm just calling to your attention things that I would like you to look for as you're traveling throughout the city in the next week or so. These are opportunities for improving our maintenance of our infrastructure during the winter, and something I would love to see looked at in terms of within a comprehensive approach to, planning and looking at all of our pedestrian and cycling and transit issues. So anyway, let me just get right to it. Time is short. Fire hydrants are starting to get buried, as you know, so keep an eye on those. Bus stops, I know that's the Rapids' responsibility, but just so you know, there are a few bus stops that have been cleared, but most of them are not being cleared and never really have been. Maybe property owners doing some of that, and the Rapid may be doing a few of them. The corners, some of the corners are being cleared out, intersection corners I've noticed, which is great, but most of them are not cleared out, so look at that. Also, if you would look at crosswalks, so you'll see a beautiful new crosswalk on Lake Drive or down by Brighton Village, and then you'll see that the approaches to the crosswalk, the sidewalk ramps aren't cleared. That's something I noticed that I thought was interesting. I saw one bike rack buried in snow, and the ones here by City Hall are buried. There aren't a lot of cyclists in the winter, but there are those who do that. I haven't looked at the schools yet, but that's something to be aware of. In the spring, you'll see the bike racks buried in snow, and people will be riding their bikes for maybe even 6 weeks before the snow is melted by the bike racks, so that's something to think about. Also, generally the sidewalks, as you know, the city only does is 3 inches. After 3 inches, the city will come and plow the sidewalks, and the sidewalks aren't getting cleared down to the bare pavement like they are required to in Grand Rapids, so that can, as you all know, that can create pretty icy conditions. That is something that I'm hearing a lot of more and more complaints about that. Also, that kind of summarizes it. I'm looking at my photos here to see if there's anything else. Notice that the bike lanes on Wealthy Street weren't clear of snow. So the motor vehicle traffic lanes had been cleared, but the bike lanes hadn't been cleared of snow. And the advantage of a traditional bike lane like those is that if you're customarily plowing the street curb to curb, it really doesn't require any extra maintenance to maintain the bike lane. So it begs the question of why would the plow just go all the way to the curb, do curb to curb like it used to prior to the bike lanes being put in. It really shouldn't cost anything extra to maintain that because it's a traditional bike lane without any kind of protective barrier, so you should be able to clear curb to curb. There are parked cars there, of course, along the hospital. It seems like that area is clear in the evening or later in the evening, whereas the residential area is more clear during the day, so there may need to be some kind of customized approach to clearing out that parking aisle in the bike lane that's alongside the parallel parking. So those are some things I've observed that do concern me. I know there's been a lot of talk about pedestrian and bicycle stopping again. I would like to see us look at that in a more comprehensive way. I'm not blaming anybody. I know the causes are complex and solutions might be surprisingly complex. So again, I don't mean to, condemn or criticize or complain. I just want to call your attention to these opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Tillman. Okay, anybody else for public comment? Tonight, no? Okay. All right, then I'm going to bring it up here and ask for the report of the mayor and city commissioners. And tonight I'm going to start down with Commissioner Pacla.
Mr. Tillman gave me a good lead into my conversation to thank the Public Works Department for all of their hard work in the snow this weekend. I myself was out there, I think, about 6 or 7 times clearing out my driveway. That's the benefit of a battery-powered snowblower, in case anybody's wondering. But I really am appreciative for the generally very clear rights of way that we have out there.
Yeah, I think Public Works deserves recognition as well as our whole public safety department for managing to do their jobs under the conditions of this week. And I took a ride along in one of the snow trucks on Saturday, which was a wonderful experience, and rode with Jeff for about 25 minutes to an hour or so. And it's something that all of us should do because you have a real appreciation for what the folks do who clear our streets and clear our roads, and the effort that goes into that. So I'm really grateful for everyone who works on our city streets, whatever they're doing. Thank you.
Would like to echo what Commissioner Pacla and Commissioner Duncan said. Don't really have anything to add, but I'm impressed with our response to it.
I just wanted to share my appreciation that we've made the decision now for a couple of years in a row to move our city commission meetings that would otherwise fall on MLK Day so that people have the opportunity to do whatever service or other community activities that they choose to do on that day. I was able to take advantage of not having a meeting and went to the GRCC event at Fountain Street Church last night. It was absolutely fantastic. Mr. Yusuf Salam, one of the Central Park 5, was the keynote speaker, and it was a great event. And I was able to do that because we moved the meeting, and so I hope that we continue to do that in the future.
Nothing like nothing. Okay.
This evening.
Okay. Well, I want to echo everybody's compliments to Public Works because they do a wonderful job. And I too have done a plow ride along, and you realize from their perspective how difficult the job actually is. So, yes, so thank you to them. And I also wanted to mention that this weekend, if anyone's interested, there's a Waterfront Park Buckthorn Learning Service Day scheduled this Saturday from 9 until noon, and we're all meeting at Waterfront Park. It's a great opportunity to learn about invasive species. This weekend in particular will be buckthorn, and help to eradicate them from our parks. And I've done that a couple times, some invasive species pulls, very informative, very fun, great group of people, and you just learn how pervasive buckthorn really is. So if you have the time and the inclination, come on out on Saturday to Waterfront Park. So, okay, so next we have our regular agenda items, starting with a zoning variance hearing on the request of Brandon Shad of 3159 Lake Drive to allow the construction of an attached garage creating a front yard setback of 51 feet 4 inches instead of the required 85 feet 6 inches. And an introduction by Alec Visakar.
Hello, Mayor, Commissioners. We do have a zoning variance request from the applicant Brandon Schott of 3159 Lake Drive, who I believe is being represented from someone from Via Design tonight. Requesting a zoning variance for a front yard setback of 51 feet 4 inches. The required average setback for this property is 85.5 feet, based on the two properties on both adjacent sides. This request is 9 feet closer to the front property line than what currently exists with the current garage. All of the zoning requirements have been met. When looking at the standards for review, the first one for special conditions or circumstances which exist on the lands. Some things to keep in mind would be that the adjacent homes were built after the subject property. With all of them being built behind the property, any renovation to the property would require a front yard setback variance. That condition is not something that's resulted from the applicant. And with the third standard, looking at it would be a substantial detriment to neighboring properties. Some characteristics to keep in mind is the amount of trees in the area, the amount of coverage between properties, the larger setbacks off of Lake Drive. In your packet, there are plans for the total renovation of the house. It's going to be quite a large renovation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
This might not be a great question for you, Mr. Misgard, because you're still relatively new, but so maybe Mr. Lefebvre, Mr. Huff could weigh in. Have we ever, more broadly from this variance, looked at our front yard setback requirements in terms of these types of situations where you have an average setback that is so much greater than what our standard setback would be, in terms of whether our ordinance should say, okay, maybe if the average is, like in this case, would require an 85, we're not going to require you to have a variance. We're going to say that the maximum is 50 or 40 or something like that. Do you know, have we ever talked about that or looked at that?
John, you can speak to that too, but I think from my experience here, it's not a common occurrence for most of our neighborhoods that are planted and built out. They generally are somewhat uniform in terms of their conformance to those setbacks. So this is probably something that you don't see that often. John, I don't know.
Yeah, I think at one point, Commissioner, there may have been a provision in the zoning ordinance similar to what you just suggested, which was, you had the required setback, and you said that this takes it back, it'll take it back, but not necessarily, for instance, in this example, 85 feet, it would have been an earlier point that would still have been considered conforming. That probably got taken out at some point during one of the rewrites, maybe the most recent rewrite, even of the zoning ordinance, and it probably got taken out because, frankly, it hadn't been used.
Sure.
And of course, that never fails. Once you do that, you get an event like tonight where it would have been very applicable.
It speaks to the unique nature of the property. We can obviously address it this way.
Alec, do we know what the actual setback is? I know we know what the average setback is, but do we know what the actual setback is for this property?
Of what they're requesting or what currently exists?
What currently exists?
It is, so they're requesting 51, about 51.5 feet, and that's 9 feet closer, so they're currently at about 60 feet off the front property line.
Okay.
Any other questions? I just have a quick question. Looking at the streetscape, if you can pull back a little bit, the home on the very end, yeah, thank you, the Woodshire, 1350, I believe Woodshire. Do you know what they see it, that their setback seems less? Do you happen to know what that is? Did you just take the average of all 4 of these?
No, so it's only within 200 feet on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what the ordinance calls for.
Okay, because it seems like this property is actually set forward more.
Yep, and then that one's actually fronted on, is that Woodshire?
Mhm.
Yep, so the requirement for that side off of Lake wouldn't be an average, it would just be 20 feet that
20
the
feet,
ordinance
okay,
calls for.
all right.
I'm sure they were set back further than that, but that's what that requirement.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. No? Okay, thank you. So now we will open it up to public comment, and in this situation, we let the applicant go first, if the applicant is here this evening, or somebody representing the applicant. State your name and address, please.
Brandon David Shad. I'm at 3159 Lake Drive. Really, I just wanted to say thank you for the support of my neighbors. They're here, and I'm very grateful to have such good neighbors. I'm going to take it over to Brian to help further explain the variance request.
Thank you.
Thank you. The only point, I thought the description was very well done. The only thing I wanted to maybe clarify, and maybe Alex could help us on this, that generally speaking, the front yard setback here is 30 feet. However, with these other buildings, it's pumped back to 80-some feet.
That is correct. Yeah, the standard setback is 30 feet, but most instances in the city where more than 25% of the house is on that stretch, there is a house there, you have to use that average.
Mhm.
So that's why we have this 85-foot.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And given the fact that this home was built generally prior to these other homes too, I think I'm hoping that will be considered. So, but otherwise, thank you, and thanks for your.
Thank you. Could
thanks,
you,
Mr.
for
Brown.
the record, please state your name and address? I didn't.
Sure, I'm Brian Barkwell. I'm with Via Design, 1051 Pinecrest.
Thank you.
Alec, is there no average or is there not a standard setback because these four homes were not plotted in the normal plot situation with the Ravenswood plot? Is that why we're using the average on those four homes?
We're using the average because there's more than 25% of the houses on this stretch, there is a house. So if, say, there weren't any other houses, or there'd be, say there's only one house next to them, we would just use the standard. Since there is a row of houses, we're using the average.
Okay.
Anybody else want to comment?
Good evening, Charles Panter, 3131 Lake Drive. Just like to formally voice my support of the project the Shads are embarking on. First and foremost, I'm very excited for the new addition of their family. One of the reasons, obviously, that they're doing this is to allow for some additional space for a new member in their family that will be coming shortly. Besides that, again, just looking forward to seeing what they've done. If anyone had an opportunity to see their property, they haven't done some work, but it's been fantastic, very tasteful, of the utmost class. So looking forward to see the addition to the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to this agenda item? No? Okay, well, at this time, I'll close public comment, and I'll bring it up here for a motion, please.
Motion to approve the zoning variance request of Mr. Shad at 3159 Lake Drive to allow a front yard setback of 51 feet 4 inches instead of the required 85 feet 6 inches.
Support.
Any comments, any more questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm happy to go first, and I made the motion, I guess, articulating my support for this. I do think that each of the required conditions for a variance have been met here. First, I do think that there are special conditions or circumstances that are peculiar to this particular property or sets of properties. We're looking at some very deep lots with houses that are set far back from where the standard setback would be. The other neighboring homes, as was mentioned, were built later and were set further back, thus creating this kind of unique situation where the current home would not otherwise be in conformance with where the neighboring homes are in terms of the lot setback requirement. I think Mr. Huff kind of indicated too, to some extent, that this was a unique circumstance in terms of even some of the reasons why the ordinance reads the way it does in terms of our front yard setbacks, that we did not have to worry about this. This is a really unique situation within the city. The circumstances on number 2, the circumstances aren't the result of the actions from the applicant. Again, this is a pre-existing circumstance with regards to these setbacks. And as to number 3, this won't be a substantial detriment to the neighboring property. It's not contrary to the spirit and purpose of the zoning ordinance. In fact, if anything, it will be beneficial. I appreciated the comments from the neighbors in support of this. In addition, I noted when I was looking at the Google view, there's substantial kind of front landscaping in front of the home, such that from the road, this isn't a situation where allowing an additional 9 feet forward would feel anything like an encroachment upon Lake Drive or the sidewalk or that area there. So I'm in support for those reasons.
So should we just walk through each one of these steps on the form? Everything that Commissioner Walter said, I concur. I could repeat all three of those things. Everything, all the staff comments, everything that was in our memo regarding this property. Item 1, the special conditions or circumstances exist which are peculiar to the land. Yes, these lots, in my opinion, they're deep and large, so because this house was the first to be built along this area of Lake Drive, it's the closest property to the established front yard setback, and it's also different because it's not part of the Ravenswood plot, and it doesn't resemble the traditional row block on that block, of block homes rather. Item 2, that the special conditions or circumstances don't result from the actions of the applicant. I agree that's correct. Yes, the circumstance is not the result of the action of the applicant. And item 3, that the authorizing of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to the neighboring property. I believe this condition has been met. These lots are deep and large, and it's also surrounded by a lot of trees and landscaping, which creates a feeling of seclusion from the neighbors. So I would support this.
Anybody else?
I just want to thank Commissioner Hamrick for doing that. I always appreciate walking through the points, and it might sound rote, but I think it's very useful, so it makes
I too will be supporting this. I'm in concurrence with others that have said their thoughts. I also have a few things to add. Under the first condition, I think it's, to me, one of the important things to look at was the fact that any modification to that garage was already in front of that front yard setback. So anything that they did was already going to require a variance. For condition number 2, the special circumstances do not result from the action of the applicant. The applicant has not owned this property for more than 10 years. I think, judging by property records, it's been about 6 years that they purchased it. So obviously this was there before they purchased the home, and not as a result of their actions. And I concur. I drove by this property on my way to and from some spots on the east side of the city, and it is well shielded from the front. There is a sidewalk in the front that is significantly in front of where this property would be. There are no homes to the south, and I really do think it speaks very highly that the neighbor who is closest adjacent to that actual construction came here to support that action.
I'd just like to echo what the other commissioners have said. I think this is a perfect example of why we have variances. It's through no action of the applicant. Makes a lot of sense. Like Chris, I also did a drive-by of this property this weekend, and there's a significant landscaping and tree cover in the front, so I'm not concerned about this affecting the character of the surrounding area, and I'm glad to support this.
Okay, I too, it looks like yours was a busy neighborhood this weekend, so I too drove by, and I noticed that, you know, you have the landscaping, the berm, and 9 feet really isn't going to make any difference, and your neighbor's input is great to hear the feedback that everybody's in support of this, so I too support this. So does anybody else have any other comments? We can take it to a vote. Okay, so item agenda number 5, we have a motion and support, taking it to a vote. So all those in favor of this zoning variance say yes?
Yes.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, so now item number 6 on the agenda, interviews and appointment of First Ward Commissioner. We have modified this agenda item to include just interviews this evening. And so these are interviews of the 3 candidates that our personnel committee, we actually had 7 applicants, and our personnel committee narrowed it down to the final 3, all wonderful applicants. And so tonight we're going to be hearing their statements and also be asking them a couple questions. So I think we'll just start in no particular order. I guess we'll just do alphabetical order. If we could start with Mr. Lawrence Fisher.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Pardon my limp, I'm suffering a little gout. My name is Larry Fisher. I live at 565 Lakeside, which is Lakewood, those apartments. I live there with my wife, Lily. It's my wife's fault that I moved to Grand Rapids many years ago. She said the quality of life over here is great. She was a lifetime resident of Southeast Grand Rapids. She was actually right across the street from the East Grand Rapids city at that time. We moved here in 1986, lived in the southeast side. I took a job at East Grand Rapids High School as a guidance counselor in 1992 and served as a counselor there for 19 years and the director of guidance at the end of that career. Early on, I was saying we need to move to East, and so we did. We moved to 855 Lakeside. That's at the corner of Lakeside and Orchard, a big yellow house. We lived there for, well, up until about a little over a year ago when we moved. Unlike many of my friends, when our kids went to school at East Grand Rapids, when they graduated, we stayed in East. We stayed in East because we love this community and we love everything about it. Our son and daughter graduated East Grand Rapids High School. 2003 and 2004, our son has now taken a position as the new manager of Bodie's, and so I invite you all to try that. That's a great place to be. We're there way too much already. As a resident of East Grand Rapids, I'm really passionate about the community. You may have looked at my resume, and one of the ways that I am aware of the city is how much I run around the city, and I think Fred knows that. It's a great place to live. We've enjoyed it. We want to make sure that it continues to be a great place to live, and that comes with a lot of responsibility, that you guys have. You know, making the decisions that keep this community great, a great place to live. We're being recognized all over the country in different articles and magazines about a high quality place to live. But that's not an easy job. There's budgets to be considered. We're hearing about the city taking care of our sidewalks and our streets. Parks and Rec is one of my favorite areas as well. And then my personal passion also happens to be the schools. I want to make sure that our relationship with our schools are really strong, because there's a lot, and our friends in public safety too. A community that's safe, a community that's taken care of, a community that has great education is a place where people want to be. And I think that's incredibly important. And so anything I can do along those lines to help in those areas, that's what I'm willing to do. There's a few people in the room that I know, and I think if you were to ask, I think I would be described as a person with passion. What I'm committed to, what I decide to do, is very important to me and becomes a high priority in my life. I give a lot of my time to the East Grand Rapids High School community for a lot of years. There's some reasons why I did decide to leave that were best for me and my family. I still, in fact, where I work now, they're tired of me talking about East Grand Rapids so much. I have lunch every day with a Kentwood City Commissioner. So as this opportunity came in early December, I talked to my friend Mo Gross, and I said, Mo, tell me about being a commissioner. And so we have those discussions, and those are the things that he enlightened me about. Is, you know, making sure the quality of life in this community is maintained. There's standards, there's rules and regulations and things that we have to adhere to. But sometimes there are variances that have to be you know, looked at and sometimes approved, and I think that's fine, because you're taking everyone into consideration when you make those choices. So happy to answer any questions. I am in a situation in my career where what I've been doing for the last 40 years in education is winding down, and there's no chance that I'll sit around and do nothing. And so when this opportunity came, I thought, wow, this would be a really cool thing to do, to be a part of, and a way to give back. I feel that I'm a service leader. I've been in leadership positions, but I look at that as someone, I think like you, who serves others. Soon, not too much further, I'll be done serving my students at the school I work at now. So I would like the opportunity to serve the community that I live in, and will continue to live in. Happy to entertain any questions.
You want to maybe start with some of the non-personnel committee people? I mean, not that I couldn't have more questions, but just to get a chance.
So, anybody?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So, Mr. Fisher, I thank you for applying, and your resume and your connections to the community are impressive. So I see the two points of emphasis with the schools and the running and trails and that. What would your main priorities be as a city commissioner?
Well, the areas that I'll go where I'm assigned. That's my whole career, but the areas of passion are the Parks and Rec Department. I actually worked with Fred a little bit when we created a home cross-country course here. When I was at East Grand Rapids, we were competing 5 communities away. That's not a home meet. And so with Fred's help, we created a course at Manhattan Park for many years, which was also used by bikers and runners and joggers and hikers and those types of things. And it was something that had to go through Fred to make sure we're doing it the way the city wanted to do it. But then the maintenance of that over the years, I was given, I don't even know how many countless hours to recondition that course every year, or those trails and those types of things. And I'm also very passionate about the schools. I'm trusting the relationship between the city and the schools is an excellent one. That is, I think that's imperative. We have a great school system here, and that has to be maintained. There's a lot of interaction between the schools and the city. I know the middle school recreation department, those types of things. So those are my main priorities. I have a lot of appreciation for our police and fire. I think they're incredibly important in our community. This has to be safe and in every way. And so if there's anything I can do to assist in those areas with those folks, with Mark and those guys, I would be happy to do that. That's where my personal passions are, but as someone who's been involved in a lot of different administrations and things like that, you go where you're needed, and so I'm happy to go wherever I'm needed. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Duncan, did you want to ask any questions?
No, I'm still.
Oh, okay. Well, I will go ahead. So if appointed, what would you do to further connect with residents, particularly in Ward 1? So if you're appointed, you haven't had that opportunity to knock on doors and whatnot.
Correct.
What would you do to engage the constituents?
Well, the first place I'd start is actually where I live. We have 51 apartments there, although right now I think a lot of those folks are in Florida. But to start connecting with that group, they get together socially periodically. And as somebody who's actually did live just outside of Ward 1, I lived in a different ward until a year and a half ago. It's a matter of time I just have to get out and meet people and look for opportunities. I don't know if there are any community gatherings. On Lakeside, we did a lot of things. We had our block parties and those types of things, so I felt like I knew my neighbors and things like that. Those would be the challenges, is trying to find opportunities to meet some people and make sure I'm listening to their concerns and bring those back to all of us.
Thank you. Another question?
I'll never hesitate to jump in, but Commissioner Duncan, are you ready with one?
I'm not ready. I'm so
All right,
sorry.
that's okay. Don't worry about it. So
I'll be here for a minute.
can you speak a little? You spoke some to your various involvement in the communities through the schools and what have you, parks, and I very much appreciate that. I'd love to hear a little bit about how your other experiences, whether it's your time as a counselor, your current position, or any other volunteer work in the community, you think has maybe prepared you or equipped you to be able to serve in this role?
I've been in the administration at East Grand Rapids Schools, and I'm in the administration now at my current school, which is West Michigan Aviation Academy. It's a charter high school at the airport. And at both places, at East Grand Rapids and at the high school where I'm at now, I served as the interim building leader. And so that means, like last year, I was the interim CEO, is what our primary position is called. That means I was doing the budget with a little bit of background, but and a little bit of support. But I had to prepare a budget for 600 kids and 60 employees and that type of thing, without knowing state aid, which is a particular challenge, not knowing how much money's coming in. And then so I have faculty that I'd like to maintain, and then I have a board that's very conscious of the bottom line and things like that. And so that was a challenge, and I think a tremendous growth opportunity for me. And we were able to take care of that without knowing how much money was coming in from the state of Michigan. We were able to give our folks a fair raise and take care of them, which helps with retention. And so that was important. Also being the leader for 9 months last year and for 6 months years before, 13 years ago. It's the same guy. Pat Quina was my boss at both places, and he left East Grand Rapids Public Schools years ago. Halfway through the year, Jenny Fee and I shared the principal role then, and managed the school year. It was some excitement. That was the year that President Bush came to town, and so that was over 20-hour day. So not afraid of doing a little hard work when it needs to be done. And then Pat left West Michigan Aviation Academy, and so for 9 months, I had to carry the ball and run with it. So we're actually doing 2 jobs at the same time. You do what you have to do in this world. And so I would say the budget part of learning was the greatest growth, but also a tremendous challenge. I spent all of Christmas break working on salary budgets for staff and things like that, because teacher retention is huge. And we were able to make everything work to everyone's satisfaction.
Thank you, I appreciate that answer.
I want to, I'm sorry. I want to give my wife some credit. Years ago, when I was with the schools, she's the one who suggested, why does the homecoming parade go where it goes? It should go downtown. And so I proposed that. This is way back. I don't even know if you remember. It didn't used to go down Lake Drive. And I brought it to our school administration. They said, oh, well, this downtown won't like that. Well, we tried it, and I think with approval of the mayor at that time and the board at that time, and I think it's been great. So I give my wife all the credit for that, although I did take it forward in her idea. The second thing, I was also very involved in the Hearts of Gold situation. From that event at the schools is, I think, very meaningful for our whole community, and so I appreciate Easter's men, all those folks who I worked with for years and years. I stayed with them for 2 years after I left East, but sometimes it's time to let go and let others do those things. Sorry.
Well, I'm just going to ask the mayor to stop me if this is a question that we don't want to ask, but I also wondered about the appetite. This is an appointed position, and the appetite for running for the position.
That's a fair
Wanted to
question.
ask about that, if we may.
I hope that's a fair question. I believe it was asked before.
Okay.
I think the term that I used was 99% sure I really want to do this. You never know until you get in it, but I have to tell you that serving in another way and being involved with a community that I care for is very, very important. My guess is that's why you're all here. And that's who I am. I think I left my last interview with the same thing. I have a passion for this community. I want it to be successful long after I'm here. I beg my son, who lives just outside, to look for housing here and send his kids to these schools. And so I'm willing to give. And without knowing truly what you guys go through all the time, I imagine this job doesn't end either. I can't say 100%, but I'm 99% right there. I want to serve, and so this is a great opportunity. If not given this opportunity, I'll find somewhere else to serve. But this would be phenomenal.
Thank you. Thanks. And we are getting close to the 15-minute mark.
Yeah, sorry. I talked too much, but sorry about that.
No,
Thank you.
no, that's good. No, that's
No, believe me.
very appropriate. No, it's very
The
good.
people know me know that's true. Thank you for your time.
We have a quick, oh, no.
We're
Nope.
good. We're all set.
We're all set? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, so continuing in alphabetical, if we could have Mr. Bradley Hexel up here.
Well, good evening. I'm Brad Hexel of 1103 Eastwood. Just wanted to start off by saying I'm honored to be a finalist to represent the first award on the City Commission, and I want to thank the mayor and the elected commissioners for their service and leadership. When I came to the Personnel Committee interview, I did not prepare a statement because I think I work better that way, but for purposes of time, I decided to do that. So. Just want to start off by telling a little story. If it hadn't been for East Grand Rapids being such a wonderful place, I probably wouldn't be married to the woman I am. The oldest of 3 children, my mother-in-law, moved with her family around the country every few years when she was young. One of their stops was a few years spent living in East Grand Rapids when she was very young. Later on, when she was 16, living in Baltimore, her father passed away unexpectedly. Newly widowed with young children, my wife's grandmother knew she wanted to live somewhere permanently, someplace that made her feel at home, someplace she wanted to place roots. So she gathered the family and they talked about all the places that they had lived. And after discussing those options, my mother-in-law, her mom, and her 2 younger siblings unanimously decided that East Grand Rapids was the place they missed, and this is where they came back. So it's only fitting that after spending several years renting in Grand Rapids' wealthy historic district, my wife and I bought our first home in East Grand Rapids. We've now spent 15 of our 20-year marriage here, and in that time we've welcomed 3 children to our family. Avery is an 8th grader at the middle school, and Sam and Lauren both attend Lakeside. all 5 of us could not imagine calling anywhere else home. We feel fortunate to live in a place that's already great, and I'd be honored to help make EGR even greater. After college, I spent several years working for the family business as a commercial construction estimator and project manager. In 2004, I embarked on a career in residential real estate brokerage and have been actively pursuing that since. It wasn't until 2008 that I realized I had a passion for community involvement and service. Our second child, Lauren, was born that year, and after she was delivered, we learned that she had been diagnosed with Down syndrome. Her diagnosis led me to the Down Syndrome Association of West Michigan. I showed up at an annual meeting. With a membership of 450, I was the only one who came. Before I knew it, I found myself a member of the board of directors and subsequently leading the organization as board president. During my tenure, I led a strategic planning weekend retreat through which we were able to grow our budgets and the revenue substantially. We added staff and created the Down Syndrome Association of West Michigan Foundation to manage a $1 million endowment. I stepped down from the association board in 2013 and continued on as a board member of the foundation until 2017. During that time, my wife and I also served several years on the host committee for Winners Cup, an annual Kentucky Derby themed gala. But perhaps my greatest learning experience since leaving academia that has instilled in me a passion for community was my joining Leadership Grand Rapids in the class of 2012. This year-long experience cemented my belief that systems-based thinking is essential in effective community building. Each month was spent focusing on various sectors or aspects of the metro region. Healthcare, quality of life, public safety are just a few of the various sectors and aspects that we learned about. This experience also exposed me to all the resources that are available, as well as put me into a network of professionals and community leaders to call on, and the importance of critical institutional, private, and public partnerships. The Commission has asked that I speak to 3 or 4 of the greatest issues I see facing the city in the next few years. My systems-based approach to things makes it difficult for me to distill this down into a few highlights or bullet points, but I'll do my best. In a nutshell, I think it comes down to 2 main things: implementation and funding. The 5-year master plan that was approved in June of 2018 is a wonderful document that serves as a roadmap to lead the Commission and the city as a whole moving forward. Time, money, and resources were spent creating this master plan, as well as the Parks and Recreation plan. It lays out a wonderful vision for our city. Without implementation, it's nothing more than a document. I also believe that funding will continue to be a challenge. Upgrades and replacement of an aging infrastructure, rising healthcare costs for city staff, and school funding challenges are just a few of the big ticket items we face as a community. The objectives outlined in the master plan and Parks and Recreation plan also have major costs associated with them. As one looks at the city budget and the various funds, it becomes obvious that costs are rising and revenue isn't keeping pace. Finding ways to increase revenue through increasing the tax base with additional development and through grants are just 2 of the ways that we could do this. If appointed, I look forward to using my professional experience, my love for this community, and engaging the most valuable resource that our city has, its residents. I look forward to helping leading the efforts that establish EGR as a benchmark community in an already benchmark metro region. EGR incorporated as a city in 1926. What an honor it would be to be a part of helping make EGR the most vibrant it's ever been in time for its centennial celebration. Thanks again for allowing me time to share my thoughts.
Thank you. So again, we want to offer up questions to those who weren't at the Personnel Committee. So either Commissioner Duncan or Commissioner Aaronhorst, would you like to ask a question?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you as well, Mr. Axel, for applying for this role, and you also have an impressive set of credentials. You mentioned the master plan both in your letter with your application and in your intro today. And I was wondering if you had any specific ideas about the master plan or any priorities within that would guide or that you'd like to see implemented.
Yes, well, clearly, I think one of the biggest things is activating the vacant space. And we have quite a bit of that in Gaslight Village. And I would really like to help start a dialogue with the private owners of that property and try and figure out a solution that's a win for everyone. I also think that moving forward, it's going to be important to keep pace with changes in technology. Transportation in general, I think we're going to see going through major shifts. And while that may help solve some of the parking problems, the master plan does talk about the need for more curbside infrastructure, bike lanes, walking. I'm a big believer in the rapid. I'd like to see more residents taking advantage of that. And again, I think the parks activating. We've got, I want to say, almost 50 acres up in Manhattan. We have quite a few ball fields, and that's a lot of space taken up when we're already surpassing the recommended number of ball fields for the number of residents we have, and what else could we do with that space? I think adding value to things like that is good for the community as a whole, and it brings our property values up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if this is so much a question, but just wanted to get your reaction, I guess. Not all of our votes up here are unanimous. A few times a year, we have some painful ones where we disagree, or the community disagrees with us. And what are your response for that? We live in a great community, and issues aren't so divisive for too long, but that is part of the job of sitting up here to make some really difficult votes that are unpleasant. Are you comfortable with that?
I am. I think that starts with a foundation of asking questions and listening, and trying to understand the point of view of the person that maybe is disagreeing with where you're coming from. Quite often you can find that consensus can be reached when people take the time to just listen and kind of find some middle ground.
I think I will be consistent with my question. So if appointed, what would you do to further contact with residents, and how would you reach out, especially in your constituents?
Well, I think a good place to start would be to just start canvassing now. I mean, I would want to take the time to knock on every door in my ward so that people knew who I was. But I also really appreciate what I've been seeing from the commissioners and the mayor with their coffees, and I'd love an opportunity to partner with the mayor on that, and then do one on my own or with my first ward colleague.
Thank you.
I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about in what ways you are currently connected with East Grand Rapids in particular. Obviously, you live here. You've lived here for 15 years, and you mentioned you have children in the schools. Are there any other things that you would point to in terms of your involvement in the East Grand Rapids community in particular, in terms of volunteer activities at the schools or other things like that that you would point to as kind of demonstrating other connections in East in particular?
Certainly. Well, I've definitely spent time in the schools, in the classroom, volunteering, and on field trips. As a whole, I have stepped back from my community involvement. I shouldn't say I've stepped back. When I stepped down from the Down Syndrome Association, part of my decision to do that was to just focus on raising my young family. I'm definitely the kind of flexible parent when I've been pursuing my career full time, but definitely been the parent who, my wife's an educator, with a strict schedule, and has to be the other side of town. So I've not been specifically involved in any initiatives. I'm definitely an active member of the community.
We have time for any more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I just have one thing I'd like to ask. So you talked about the master plan, and you seem to be somewhat familiar with the goals and objectives that are outlined in that document. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you feel that the commission has identified as a priority that you disagree with?
I don't know if you characterize it as a disagreement, but the one thing that I think we're going to see more of a need for is multi-unit family housing. And I think that currently the zone that is designated for that is somewhat limited. Now, I understand that you can't just go in and change R1 to multifamily, but there are more opportunities to create zones that it would fit with the character of the neighborhood, to have more townhomes and multi-unit family housing like you see all over Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. So the last person this evening is Melissa James. You ready? Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm fortunate to know a few of you, but my name is Melissa James. I live at 2647 Lake Drive. I have lived in East Grand Rapids since 1982. Crazy, my family moved here when we were 15 years old, and let me tell you how much fun it was to begin high school here at age 15. I've never really left East Grand Rapids with the exception of going away for college and things like that, and I have raised my family, and all three of my children have attended East Grand Rapids High School. My twin boys are seniors and will be finishing this year and leaving me and my husband as empty nesters. So that time in my life really draws me as a great time to be applying for this city commission job. I guess I would like you to know about me that ever since we came to East Grand Rapids, I was an active volunteer. Gosh, even in the 80s, I was a Girl Scout, I was a candy striper at Blodgett. My entire family, I think, is one that people would refer to as being called to community service. We might not be first and foremost on somebody's radar, but we have certainly been consistent as a family in our community work. And I have been involved in nonprofit boards. In the irony of having twins, we were fortunate enough to need some help at home. And in an effort to get out of the house with young children, I spent every afternoon out in the community doing some kind of work from the time my boys were 0. So I went right from a professional career with a large corporation to basically full-time community volunteerism. And I have continued that through the school system and then into nonprofit board leadership, which I've been conducting for about 15 years now. I'm currently on the board of Family Futures. We serve children and families ages 0 to 5 in West Michigan. And we were involved, something that we're aware of here at the city is we were involved in efforts to help pass the early childhood privilege. So that's an area around which I'm familiar. I would also consider myself really a community connector in those 15 years of work in the community and work in the schools. I really seem to be somebody who people say, well, who do you know here? I'm working on a project here, how can you help me? So I really believe in doing that around the topics of early childhood initiatives, kind of community relations, and diversity and inclusion. When I managed people for Sara Lee Corporation, I had teams as large as 40 people and budgets. I think my largest budget was $45 million. And in that, I tried to always kind of find the humanity or the people. I really believe in seeking first to understand a situation. And I bring that up tonight because I do want to talk about what I see as our vision for the city and really how residents and individuals play into that. I will also let you know, for those of you not on the personnel committee, maybe I'm an over-preparer, but I really wanted to go through a time of reflection and study. And I've spent 7 weeks really digging into our master plan, our Parks and Rec plan, the goals and objectives book, the Michigan Municipal League website. I found myself down in rabbit holes reading about main streets and how the DNR makes parks recommendations and sort of how this all fits together. And can Melissa be an effective city commissioner? Did this work even appeal to me in the first place, right? So that's kind of the way I operate, I guess. I can take any personal questions, if anybody has them. Otherwise, I did prepare sort of 3 priorities per the instructions.
Go ahead with your priorities if you want to go first.
You know, my first one, I sort of started thinking about, and it really isn't a priority that we call out in our master plan or any of our documents, but more of a topic that I found flowing through. And that is really service to citizens or resident responsiveness. So as I think about our priorities in the next few years, right, it's woven throughout the goals of it by department. We want to continue our excellent work. And I wanted to talk about a few examples of that, I guess, or my thoughts around that. I thought it was a good starting point for the interview is what do I really see as excellent service for our city? And of course, I love it here. I've been an active volunteer, so it's all good. But I would say at the end of the day, it's service to residents and service to people. And so as I consider a commission role, I have thought about what does it look like to walk in those shoes. You asked the question about an angry or a difficult decision. One might think also about a frustrated resident on Facebook and how a commissioner or how the city as a whole responds to that. And I would lie to say I have the answer at every turn, but certainly I know that it's the work of the city to be exceptionally responsive to our residents. And I think moving forward with technology and sort of trends in communication, we know that our residents will demand more and more of us. I think around that, what I would seek to do and what I would hope the city sees as a priority is to really help citizens continue to engage with the city as we talk about master planning and as we talk about Gaslight Village. How do we as a city encourage citizens to own that process? How do we want them to be engaged? Do we say to them, hey, listen, you know, it's your responsibility to shop here, for instance. So just kind of a thought about that. And I would say also we're doing an excellent job in so many ways, engaging citizens on advisory boards, planning commission, that then leads somebody to pursue a city commission position. But the more full the room is, the more active our citizens are, is what's going to make us most successful as a city. And I kind of thought a little bit also about responsiveness to residents and frustration, and kind of thought about Facebook and some of the places where we see angry residents and how do we handle that. And I wondered if a priority for us in responsiveness might be to consider something like a 311 system. I don't propose to be an expert in these matters, but certainly a 311 central source for residents to find information and for the city also to log, track, document, and be able to share back to residents, hey, we've responded to X number of complaints of dog barking this year, or speeding, or noise complaints. Allows the city, through technology, some real opportunities. And I also read that 311 systems have about a 60% self-service rate also. So just my reading. Also, I wanted to draw attention to what I love as a continued message kind of around that 311 idea is the fact that the commission continues to say to residents, call the city, call us, ask for help. You know, being frustrated in a vacuum is not an engaged citizen, it's an angry citizen. I noticed that public safety is beginning a series of open houses or meetings here coming up, and I thought that was such a great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. If I were appointed commissioner and I heard that question being asked, that's the type of thing that I would make certain to attend, draw residents' attention to, make sure that in my communications people knew, hey, public safety is listening. They're out there, they're doing things for you. So that was one priority I saw for the city. Any questions around that?
No, we probably want to be just slightly more brief with the other couple, just
Oh,
from
gotcha,
a time
sorry.
standpoint.
Yes,
That's okay.
absolutely.
I understand.
Yeah. Second one is our continued financial health. In reading through our budget, I understand that we have some real opportunities, some of which we can do things about, but certainly we're very proud of our AAA bond rating. But our Headley Amendment puts us in a position in which, even though our home values are increasing, our ability to access revenues from property taxes is limited to 5% or inflation, and we're operating in a 2% inflation model. So I understand that we have ways we're going to need to look at our finances. I also understand that we're in a position, as many cities are, where many cities in Michigan, where we're almost double dipping ourselves with contribution to pensions for employees who have retired, as well as funding a defined contribution 401k. And I know there are things we're going to need to look at around modifying that. And so we don't end up with a huge liability snowball in 20 years. Looking at it now is the healthy way to go about it. I guess my third priority that I saw for the city has already been talked about this evening in so many ways, but really the implementation of the master plan, right? Such a great document, so much good learning there. And I also read about all kinds of other planning. So one can't help but wonder if there are other things we can look at to complement the master plan, other types of city planning that would assist us as we look at development specific to Gaslight. The master plan and the Parks and Rec plan have done a great job of informing how we're going to be spending our dollars, or would like to spend our dollars in the next several years. But another type of plan that would look at, for instance, retail, and the ways in which our citizens would actually be interested in and have already committed to spending their dollars on retail and on service. There's a model out there, it's like a retail inventory. So, how do we convene, it's already been talked about tonight, how do we convene all those stakeholders around the table and try to get some really good dialogue? Also in the master plan, we talk about East Grand Rapids as our assets being our lake, our walkability, our public schools, and how do we continue to create what we know a more 21st century downtown is, which is one that is around place, engagement of citizens, one that offers experiences. And so again, convening those stakeholders and trying to find a way in which everything that we do in that Gaslight Village planning has a sense of place, engagement, experience around it. I think our history is really an asset. I love Mary Dersh when she gets going on Facebook and talks about city, and you really see, or our history, you really see citizens come forward going, oh, I remember this spot or that building or that business. Could we find a way in which our history and our sense of place informs what we do moving forward? Thank you. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
So probably a couple quick questions. We are. So does anybody, Commissioner Ennis, did you want to ask any questions?
Sure, I'll start out this one as well. But I'd like to thank you, Mrs. Janes. I can thank the other candidates for putting your resume in, and once again, I think we have an excellent set of candidates, yourself included. One thing I noticed in your letter that you wrote to the City Commission is your connections to various nonprofits, and you mentioned that ever since your kids have been in school or your twins have been in school, you volunteer for a number of organizations, and you identified that as one of the things you bring to the City Commission. How would you leverage your connection to those nonprofits as a City Commissioner?
They definitely, a sense of the fact that planning and organizations all kind of have a lot of things in common, right? Challenges, need to look to the future, funding, all those things. And so really I have found my corporate background informing a lot of my nonprofit work. I've hired and fired, really exciting on the front end of a relationship with an entity, like a vendor, also with a human being. I found that informing my work in nonprofit and a real drive to connect and get the right people at a table. And as I was going through this time of self-reflection, I found myself thinking, oh, you know, so-and-so could help me, so-and-so could help me, so-and-so is an expert in this, or this organization is an expert in that.
Mr. Duncan, do you have any questions?
Just a quick one about the appointment versus running for the position in 2 years when the appointment comes to a conclusion. How do you feel about that?
That was my first thought, and the answer is resounding yes. Absolutely, we'll run for it. I already thought about that engagement with citizens piece and sort of looking at the calendar and going, wow, golly, it's the middle of winter, but one needs to get around and meet people. You know, is it too early to begin the doors? It's too early. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. So, and then that's kind of leading into my question, and then I think we'll end this, but if appointed, what would you do? So you mentioned you would knock on the doors. What else would you do, if anything, to engage the residents of Ward 1?
Definitely, other elected officials I know in other areas really love the constituent coffee. And of course the work that goes behind that, and significantly afterwards. You can sit there and hold a coffee and 5 people show up, but if you don't follow up with them, then you're not doing your job. Likewise, if you're gonna hold a constituent coffee or a community coffee and don't promote it, well, how vested are you in really meeting residents? So I would say that I already had sort of thought through, you know, what that might feel like, and I feel really comfortable with it.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all the candidates that came out tonight and went through this process. I just really appreciate it, and you're all very qualified candidates, so thank you. So then, moving on to item number 7 on the agenda. So introduction of an ordinance to amend section 9.56 of chapter 93, title 9 of the city code pertaining to the age limit for tobacco products. So introduction by City Attorney John Hoff.
This is, there are very few times when we get granted by federal law as contrasted to state law, but this is one of those instances where the federal government acted after a number of states had raised the tobacco smoking age to 21. The FDA stepped in and made a federal statute act by Congress that did just that. And so what is in front of you tonight is simply looking at the 3 sections we have in the miscellaneous offenses to deal with tobacco use by underage persons, which are subsections N, O, and P of section 9.56. They're identical to how they read right now, except that the age right now is 18, and I've gone in and changed the age to 21 in all 3 sections. I would encourage you to do this because frankly it is the federal law, and the statute that the state will also be enforcing. Tonight would be an introduction of this with a consideration of the meeting on February 3rd for the final adoption.
Do you have any questions? Mr. Hope, any questions?
Do we currently sell cigarettes or tobacco products in our grocery store here or at?
D&W does, yes.
Okay.
I think Rite Aid does as well.
Okay, so you need a motion, right? Motion to introduce. I'll move to introduce the ordinance to amend section 9.56 of chapter 93 of title 9 of the city code pertaining to the age limit for tobacco products.
Any second?
Second.
Any further comments or discussion?
Mr. Huff, a quick question for you. Do you have there with you the definition of tobacco product? Is that?
That's an interesting question. The answer is, believe it or not, that is an undefined term. When we talk later this evening about the vaping ordinance, one of the things being added is the definition of tobacco products.
Okay.
There is a state law definition, and but remind me when we get to that, Maya, or I'll highlight that definition for you. So
Okay.
it's interesting that we used it throughout. Probably picked it up from state law and missed the definition.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay, all right, so we'll take this to a vote. This is a vote on the introduction of this ordinance. And all those in favor, say yes?
Yes.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and so lastly, on the regular agenda is item number 8, the Public Safety Quarterly Meeting Schedule and Topics, to be introduced by Chief Carroll.
Mayor, evening commissioners, I would like to talk about community engagement. Seems to be a good topic. As you know, last year I came before you, we had 2 officers, Public Safety Officer Eric Conklin and Public Safety Officer Dave Catchy, and they proposed a Public Safety Academy. We got 1 resident response from that. In hindsight, looking at it, it was a lot of time spent. We didn't want to lose the interest of the community, because we really want to try and get to know the community on a better basis and have the community get to know us. So we felt that these quarterly meetings, as you know, we have 3 shifts, A, B, and C shift, and we can do a quarterly meeting once a year and try and engage the public on specific topics of importance to the community and to the department. And I've just listed a couple of things there. The primary purpose of the meetings is to increase our contact and interaction with residents and the public in general. Allows the community to get to know each 24-hour shift and officers on a more personal level. Educate the public on topics of relevance, interest, or importance. Allow questions of public safety officers, and then give the department personnel an opportunity to answer. And always include anything related to traffic and other safety issues during each quarterly meeting. This is kind of a pilot project, so to speak, and we can kind of see how this goes. But we're very interested in trying to get to know the residents. We do a really good job with the block parties, engaging the schools, those types of things, but you can always do things differently in a better way. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with these meetings. Our first meeting is not January 23rd. At our Finance Committee meeting, we decided that might be a little bit too quick, so we're going to push it back to January 30. So I want to make sure everybody gets that date correct, because I believe my memo has the incorrect date on there. Any questions?
Will that be, do you know what time? On the
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, okay.
What's 7 o'clock until?
Until whenever. We're going to keep it open-ended.
Okay, yeah. Right. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I've got one.
Okay.
Chief, I came to the traffic meeting that happened before the election last year, and I was really impressed by the conversation that happened there. You had a lot of data there that was either provided by Public Safety or by Acting City Manager Lefebvre. Are you planning, or would you consider bringing additional data to these
We will,
meetings?
particularly with issues pertaining to crime and traffic and studies, we will try and have as much data there so we can have that data available for the community if they have some particular questions, like traffic studies, numbers of crimes, those kinds of things, numbers of tickets written, number of traffic stops, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
We'll have that information available to the best of our ability.
Great, thank you.
I just would say this, I think this is a great idea. I appreciated the thought process before in terms of the academy. I'm not surprised that that level of commitment is tough for people to commit to, and having something that's a little bit more of an open house. I can drop in quarterly, or if I don't make it to one particular quarterly meeting, that's the one I make it to one over the next year, then I have an opportunity to make some connections and hear some things and share some concerns about traffic or public safety. I think this is a great way to approach it. So I'm thankful that you're taking this on.
So just to reiterate, this will be an open house style format? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
the first meeting we're going to do here at the City Commission chambers, and we thought about doing it at the Public Safety Department. And I would personally like it to be probably a little bit more informal. We go through this, we'll have an agenda, give a chance to the community to meet the officers who left on me there. And then, you can ask us questions, and then it also gives you a chance to get to know us as well. Because we have new commissioners, and a lot of the residents may not know us on an individual basis, so that type of thing.
Do you have, I think something that might be of interest to the residents, if during that, maybe the first meeting that you hold, would you be able to have a list of all the officers and their titles, so that people could know their names and
Maybe a picture.
or something like that?
I know I can do the names and the titles, and I think I can do the pictures too.
Yeah, that would be perfect,
Okay.
just so that everyone can see and know who's who, and they have some familiarity. Not that they're gonna remember every single
Right, I
officer,
get it.
but it's just nice to put a face to the name.
Yeah.
I think this is a fantastic idea, and thank you so much, and I look forward to participating in them as well, and I encourage as many commissioners as are able to join in, and I think it'll be really beneficial, and please encourage neighbors and friends to come, everybody in the community. This is a great opportunity, so thank you so much for starting this, and again, this is a pilot, we'll see how it goes, so thank you.
All right, thank you.
So, motion please to, of this public safety quarterly meeting schedule and topics.
Motion to have public safety quarterly meeting schedule and topics.
And a second, please. Support. Any other comments before it goes to vote? Okay, all those in favor, say yes.
Yes.
All opposed? Motion carries. So next is the consent agenda, and a motion to please approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, so vote, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say yes.
Yes.
All opposed? Motion carries. So now we do open up what we're calling our work session, and there are several topics for discussion. In our work session, this is just a less formal open discussion between city staff and the city commission. And these most likely will appear on the agenda for public comment at a later date. But please do hear what's happening, and it will be very informative as to what's going to happen on the commission and come before the commission in the near future. So I guess starting with item number 16, discussion of recreational marijuana ordinance.
Okay, I'll start from there. This past year, with the ballot initiative statewide for recreational marijuana, the city commission considered whether to opt in or opt out, and at the time, with the regulations still to be seen, the city commission decided to opt out with the sunset clause for June of 2020. In advance of that sunset date, we wanted to, with some of the regulations out there, we wanted to, in particular, highlight some of the buffering regulation that's out there in terms of what that means from a state perspective, and also looking to our neighbor, the city of Grand Rapids, and what they're doing in terms of opting in. So if we could pull up the buffering, perhaps. So what we've done here, and I'll just reference the MRTMA, which is the state regulation, section 9, in paragraph 3C of the state regulation. A marijuana establishment is not to be located in any zoned exclusively for residential use or within 1,000 feet of a pre-existing public or private school providing education to any grades from K through 12. So, looking what that means for the city of East Grand Rapids, we have this map here, which is our zoning map, and then we're showing you with that red buffer from Wealthy Elementary School as well as East Grand Rapids High School, what that means. When you look at the only zones that we have that are not exclusively residential, that would be our C1 commercial district, which is the kind of that centrally located red or pink color, as well as the white hashed PUD zoned areas. So if you'll note, the 1,000 feet excludes any location because any parcel that would be C1 or PUD automatically from the state statute would exclude any area where recreational marijuana could be sold. I would also note that the current version in terms of buffers for the city of Grand Rapids, our neighbor that surrounds us, that are opting in, they have the 1,000 feet applied to schools as well, but also directly to residential zones, daycare facilities, public parks, and churches and school houses. So in terms of if the city commission is interested in moving towards exploration of opting in, what those other buffers are, if you start looking at where Waterfront Park is, where you look at where John Collins Park is, and obviously, as I noted, that crowding of our residential exclusively zones directly to our smaller commercial core, any kind of buffer you look at there is going to create challenges for that type of activity. So this evening we wanted to start with that, see if there's any questions, and if this information is helpful in terms of staff and legal counsel moving forward with particular materials here in the future, we'd like to hear from
Mr. LaVille, I have a question. If East Grand Rapids were to opt in, and I see there's a little corner of the plan unit development zone sticking out from these buffer zones, if that plan unit development were to be developed, let's say into some kind of retail area, if we opted in, would a retail establishment be permitted in that corner, or is that considered part of the same parcel? Like, how do those?
With our understanding and looking into this with legal counsels that in practices of other communities, when you look in terms of what that buffer is, it's actually to the parcel itself. So that would eliminate the small areas of that parcel there where I guess what people call the Memorial Medical Center area, and also Rose's restaurant too. So because that buffer touches those parcels, it's not to the building, it's to the parcel. It just eliminates those. And further, and noting as I noted with the exclusive residential zones, obviously there's the antique shop there at the corner of Lakeside in Greenwood, as well as some offices on Greenwood there that are existing non-conforming uses. So they're still zoned exclusively for that. So they're either grandfathered or they have special use permits or variances that have previously been approved. But with the state statute, those would not be eligible for citing.
So then one follow-up question. If we were to opt in, unless there were a change in zoning, there would still not be any opportunity for marijuana establishment in East Grand Rapids?
That's correct. However, things can change. Let's say a school campus. Obviously, we have schoolhouse condos that used to be East Grand Rapids schools. If there's a change and we don't keep our eye on the ball or not paying attention to some of these changes in use, that would change those regulations. If we don't officially have something on the books, that's where some communities, I think in particular, that's an issue that just arose in the city of Detroit, where if there's a lapse in time and someone applies to the state and you don't have a regulation in place to protect you, then somebody is potentially unregulated in your jurisdiction. So that's the piece that we would have to be extremely vigilant. If there's, but certainly the future can change too. So, if the commission decides based on this information to consider opting out, certainly if there's a change with the state regulation or other things that we can't foresee at any time, the city can always opt in if there's a change in those circumstances.
And the buffer, the 1,000 feet from a school buffer is created by the regulation, not by, it wasn't actually part of the ballot proposal, right? So I mean, that
No,
could
it's actually in the
it is.
statute.
It is in the statute. Okay. I was just trying to figure out if that's something that we can't necessarily 100% rely on, because if it was a regulation, then, some new administration could change the regulation and all
Of
this.
course, the statute can change as well. It's a different process.
And I think that's in terms of our neighbor, which surrounds us, City of Grand Rapids. They're trying to stay consistent with their opting in to kind of follow that same buffer, and not just only for schools, but some of those other more sensitive type of uses as well. And I think that kind of plays into the concept of looking to opt in. If you looked at what those buffers would be, you'd have circles everywhere overlapping each other, and they will all be excluding that use.
Did you say the city of Grand Rapids has a 1,000-foot buffer from any residential area? Or
No, their terminology is a little bit different. It has to do with their primary road system, I believe.
Right, unlike the crow flies, which is how most of these circles are measured, they use streets for the residential setbacks. So so, it's still 1,000 feet, but it works out usually with a much smaller area, because you'd have to come out a street and then, for instance, turn to go down it, would not be the most direct route to the house, and so, it would probably allow it to be closer.
So where are we measuring this buffer from exactly? Where is
The
that
buffer is like
radius?
for anything else we do, the buffer's from the parcel itself, so the parcel for Wealth Elementary School, and also, yeah, it's the.
So if it's a strangely shaped parcel, are you
Yep.
going from the center of the parcel out?
It's from the boundary of the parcel
From the
itself.
boundary.
So when you look at the outer hues of the boundary there, that they kind of resemble the shape of the parcel you're measuring from. So if you're looking at,
You can use the annotation.
yeah, that's not.
Do you want to use this one? Oh, yeah, it's not working. Oh, there it goes. Somebody says working. Somebody says it's not me.
Oh, because it's using mine.
Okay.
Mr. Huff, I have another question while we're looking at that. Do we currently have any other distance-based exclusions for any type of establishment on the books, such as for places that sell or serve alcohol or anything like that?
Alcohol has a system where they inquire of schools if they're within a certain radius. That's actually done by the state. Used to be done by us, but it's not done by the state. The other one we would have is the same radius was applied when we were looking at adult entertainment zones. And frankly, if you look at that map, it looks identical to this map. And it also measured from the schools.
What's the distance with
1,000 feet.
alcohol?
Alcohol was, 1,000 or 500.
You are allowed to ask schools within 500 feet of a business what their thought is on it. So it's not an exclusion, it's just an opportunity to comment if there's a school within 500 feet of a business selling alcohol. So it's not necessarily a prohibition.
So if, for example, we have a restaurant right next to a high school and they have a liquor license, so if they did come out and say, we don't want this here, then would that carry any weight? Would they not be able to sell it, or?
They're allowed to comment. I believe the State Liquor Control Commission could overrule it.
Okay.
We always give the schools notice when we have one of these being applied for. Generally, the schools have written us a letter saying as long as they abide by all of the rules and they train their workers on how to card people and stuff, we don't have a problem with it.
It's contained.
Yeah, yeah. So usually the schools are very understanding and say as long as they are abiding by all the rules, we don't have a problem with it. It's been my experience.
The measurement technique that we use, the 1,000 foot from the boundary, seeing Grand Rapids have a different measurement technique, is that something that we have codified somewhere?
That is specific to them opting in terms of this regulation in and of itself. So it's not the measurement for the schools is one issue that is separate from some of those other items. So in terms of looking at the residential areas, as Attorney Huff noted, that methodology is allowed to be more flexible in terms of what the local community, local city commission determines is what fits the community.
Grand Rapids did use the same formula though for measuring the school.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
From the boundaries of the schools. So we would never, what I'm getting at is we would never anticipate a change to that formula that says measure from the center of the school or the center of the plot of land as opposed to boundaries.
The general thought in the municipal community is that if you're measuring from anything other than the boundaries, you say that in your ordinance or your statute. And this comes up, interestingly enough, in some of the things such as wind turbines and so forth, where they're usually trying to protect buildings and not necessarily property. And so the fall zones actually measure from buildings, but that's specifically spelled out in the statute.
Thank you.
Has the city of Grand Rapids published a map of their kind of exclusion and inclusion zones? And I'm most curious as to, frankly, where's the closest possible place?
Yeah,
to
so
East Grand Rapids?
the latest one I've seen it has been sometime, they tend to be more towards the periphery of the Grand Rapids city boundaries. So they tend to be actually more towards the boundary communities of Wyoming, Camelot, East Grand Rapids, Walker. That was, part of the debate that was had about a year ago in terms of that residential buffering. They are not applying that to adjacent communities, so you can be, that only applies to their jurisdiction. So some of their locations are, for neighboring communities, are closer to the boundary versus internal, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying, so to put a real fine point on it, is there any possibility under Grand Rapids maps that there's gonna be recreational marijuana possibly in either Easttown or Brighton Village?
Yes, yeah, those are two location areas that have been identified.
That, at least from what we've seen, would not fall within one of their exclusion codes where it could be an option.
That's correct.
Are either of those zones, specifically Easttown or Brighton Village, within 1,000 feet of our schools, Wealthy and Brighton Downs?
No, I don't believe they are.
That was my next question.
Sorry, Jerry.
Pause for dramatic pause.
Dramatic pause, right.
One other thing is Grand Rapids is still flushing out these additional zones that they're creating. In fact, I think we meeting this week on the 23rd. And they have received some comments about certain uses, and they have in fact some amended legislation, for instance, with churches, where they've said that they're still keeping retail uses away from churches, but they aren't necessarily keeping non-retail uses. So for instance, a grow facility, which might be in an industrial building or factory building, could be even next door to a church under the proposed legislation. But they kept the retail use away. So they're making those kinds of distinctions.
And are they still in the process of codifying their ordinance related to this, or are they at a
They're still in the process of doing that.
I mean, it's not the direct topic of the work session, I suppose, but I mean, it's a secondary and important question is whether or not we, as a matter of good neighborness with the city of Grand Rapids, want to have any input with regards to recreational marijuana facilities that would be right on the edge of our borders. I mean, this is setting aside how you feel about recreational marijuana, but it strikes me as if the city of Grand Rapids has decided that they want a certain 1,000 feet buffer zone from certain residential or what have you, but they're not going to count the East Grand Rapids residential that's right there, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it seems like something that maybe we want to be talking to them about. Maybe we already have.
We have this past year, the other 5 metro cities did, from mayors had sent a communication that they wanted that to be respected within the other boundaries. And I believe they moved forward with not doing that. The Grand Rapids City Commission did so. I'm not sure in terms of whether that's been revisited, but at that time, as they're moving through this process, I know that communication was sent unanimously from the neighboring communities, and they decided to pursue it anyway.
I'm sorry, could you clarify one more time what kinds of residential development are protected or have this buffer, and what kinds aren't?
So that would lean towards your own zoning. So in East Grand Rapids, we have R1, R2, R3, and MFR, and in each one of those, they are exclusively residential uses. So if there was let's say a specific zoning category for mixed use that had a residential component, that would still qualify because it's not exclusively residential. But in terms of what we have for outside of the PUDs, which are covered in that buffer, we don't have that available here in East Grand Rapids.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have clarified. I was talking about in the city of Grand Rapids ordinance, which said there was some kind of residential development that was protected, or that Grand Rapids would not allow building within 1,000 feet or
They're looking to try to create some buffers from some of those residentially exclusive type zones too. So they're looking at the big picture. We're 3.4 square miles, and if you scale that and look at how large Grand Rapids is, I think they're trying to look and see where they can provide these buffers for some of those sensitive type locations or zone areas, just to see where that might, where the chips may fall there. That's more of a challenge here because we have, our business district is several blocks, and that's a challenge. You know, it's not like we have an industrial park where, you know, we tend to be very heavily on the residential side. So in terms of areas where we can do that, and just how the community was developed and planned and built in terms of where our schools are in particular, that does create a challenge for that consideration.
Any other questions or comments?
Is there any other information we can provide to the commission at a future meeting, or is there, we're trying to look in terms of what may be of interest to move forward with materials, consider, you know, opting out with the information we have. We do have that deadline coming up in June, and if there was any further consideration, we would need to get moving on and spend time and resources into investigating further. Or is this information helpful to move forward with that approach?
It seems that to opt in would be a lot of time and effort and expense for really. Right, because we're gonna stay, obviously, to protect our schools within, I would assume that most residents in the commission might wanna stay within that same recommended 1,000 feet buffer to stay.
It's required.
Yeah,
It's not
and
even an option.
we would need, well, we could opt in and change it.
If you opted in, you can address some of these buffers if you opt in with your regulations. But even if you look at, as I noted earlier, if you were looking at buffers from our parks or from the schools, even if they were shrunk, those consecutive rings cover everything.
Right.
And so, you know, unless you're going to do a buffer of like 10 feet, I think you're going to have a hard time finding locations that would be that exclusively C1 or PUD zone areas where it's even feasible.
Are there any other communities that are near or in West Michigan that you're aware that do have a buffer, that have opted in and have a smaller buffer?
You know, I don't want to say I know of anything specifically. I think, you know, like I said, in Grand Rapids, it appears that in a lot of these, that's kind of the rule of thumb they're following for most cases. As Attorney Huff noted, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Lowell has opted in, but if you think about Lowell, they have a business district that doesn't have schools in it. Most of their schools are outlined on business. I don't know what, I haven't looked at the zoning ordinance, I don't know what radius they may or may not have.
I'm just trying to think if there were any other municipalities that were kind of nearby that opted in, that do have something similar where the schools are in their business core, and they would actually say, you know, let's have a buffer zone that's not as big. And I'm just wondering that, you know, it makes me curious, who would opt to do that?
Yeah, we have a unique situation with our schools are all in the business district, and at some point in the future, should that change, like for example, the school condos moved, would it be an easy thing for a municipality?
No different than any other ordinance.
Okay, so if at some point the schools did move or the situation changed, and the business district didn't have the schools dictating this buffer zone, it would be an easy thing to opt in at that point.
Yeah, to me, this is an easy call. Like, I mean, there's not even, it's an academic exercise, right? We don't have a business district that's separate from our school area. So we, to some extent, we don't even have to grapple with, well, what if we did, and would that mean that we might be comfortable with it? I mean, I don't think there's, it's cut and dry.
That's why we were, you know, as last, you know, this past year, you guys were considering it. We're waiting for some of the stuff to get fleshed out. We wanted to get out ahead of that, not getting too close to that sunset provision, and just at a very basic level, start here with this to just kind of show what we're facing, given how we're built out and our layout.
Yeah, I think that's the reality. I mean, I think even if you're someone who's a proponent of recreational marijuana, there's just not a physical place for it within our layout in terms of the way that we're zoned currently. And I don't think anybody's purporting that we need to create a new commercial district right
use is still legal from that perspective, from that ballot, so it's more, we're talking more in terms of for everybody, the sale of this for, and so.
Right.
So all that still applies, and I think in terms of what Grand Rapids has in place for access, people will be able to get it just like they can. We don't have gas stations in East Grand Rapids, but you can get gas.
No fast food, but you can still get gas.
So I think.
And where do you go? You go to East Town, where the gas station is.
Well, and that to me begs the actual other potential action item, which is whether or not there's anything else that either formally or informally we should be doing with our neighbor in the city of Grand Rapids to reinforce our feelings with regards to recreational marijuana right on our borders. I mean, I think that's, I understand that whatever we asking and trying to work with a neighbor, but I think that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of if we want to do that. I mean, if there's a feeling that if it was all within our jurisdiction that we would have certain residential buffers, but those aren't kind of being honored by a neighbor, then I think that's something that we should at least be having discussions with and making our opinions felt on. You know, I'm torn on that. I mean, I certainly believe in having some sort of buffers with regards to any sort of recreational marijuana business. On the other hand, you know, the state did vote for the proposal. The residents of the city, if you look at the city results, did vote in favor of the proposal. And so, you know, I am in favor of reasonable access that is consistent with that law. And so, you know, having residents who did vote for the proposal and do choose to use recreational marijuana be able to access it where they don't have to go to Lowell to get it, I think that's consistent with how people chose to vote. But I also think that we need to balance that against if we as a city would expect some sort of residential buffers from those types of retail dispensaries, then we should be talking to our neighboring communities about honoring that.
We certainly can do that, and I can follow up with the commission on that. And to your point with what even locally here, our residents voted, the majority of them voted for that proposal. You know, some of the things that I've heard engaging with some of our neighboring communities and discussing this topic, you know, there's discussion of, you know, some people voted for it because they just believe in decriminalizing it. Some people voted it because they just wanted to be able to use it in their house, but they may not have voted for it to put an establishment. So there's you know, I know some people there's a lot of different perspectives as to why they voted, and the ballot language was pretty broad and vague, so.
Oh, absolutely, and we talked about this when we voted before to put the temporary opt-out, is that, I mean, the statutory language explicitly included the opt-out rights for cities, and so I think very much we could have had a number of people who chose to vote for the proposal, almost expecting that East Grand Rapids would still choose to opt out of any sort of retail, so I appreciate that.
One way, I had experience with a few people knocking on doors in the fall during the campaign, and not many, but some people did express the fact that they would like to see something like that, an establishment in East Grand Rapids in the Gaslight Village. But when I explained to them proximity to the schools, and at the time I didn't know what the buffer would be, but I think that there would be one. And when that was explained to them, I understood that it's probably not best served in Gaslight Village because of that, and then they understood that, you know, perhaps they'd have to go to Easttown or whatnot. So once it's explained, people understood it.
I was just thinking about what Commissioner Walters was saying about the consideration for any kind of residential buffer, asking neighboring communities. And one thing that came to my mind is, and maybe Attorney Huff or Mr. Fayev can help answer this, but what is the nature of these establishments? Are these purely retail stores where people would go and buy something and take it home and use it somewhere else, or is this more like a bar where people would show up and use it on premises? What is authorized, or could they be both? What's authorized by the state statute?
Interestingly enough, the term is used as marijuana establishment, and that includes not just retail establishments, but also grow establishments, which, by the way, are often sometimes tied together. That's not unusual use either. Your question is an interesting one, because one of the things that seemed to be a concern in Grand Rapids was the idea that they wanted certain of those types of establishments in different, in certain zoning districts. And so, for instance, the retail uses, while they wanted the retail shops, they were very concerned, more concerned where those were than they were with some of the other things, because they didn't view those uses as invasive or as creating a problem. So, for instance, they didn't want retail uses near parks because they felt that that might impact what was going on in the parks. But they didn't care if you had a facility that was just a grow facility or a transportation facility located near a park.
And I guess what I was getting at is there any kind of establishment under Michigan law where patrons would show up and smoke or ingest marijuana
It
there?
sounds like there's a potential for that, but it sounds like that seems to be almost a non-existent thing from what I can tell. And in fact, interestingly enough, Grand Rapids, and mind you that this is not final, but the way their ordinance is written, they didn't opt for the, you might remember we talked about the first time, there's zones or attachments or areas where you could have, and people thought, well, that's so you can put it outside a sports arena if there's a concert or something. They have not elected to employ that provision. So it appears that places of public consumption are not, at least at this point, on the forefront of what people are allowing.
Okay, thank you. Because I was thinking that when you're talking about proximity to a residential neighborhood, that seems like a pretty key difference, whether people are just walking in, buying something, and walking out with a paper bag, or whether, you know, we're gonna have stone people walking out in establishments and milling around residential areas.
Any questions, or we can proceed with materials for the ordinance for non-adult provision based on the information we have tonight, and certainly then we would go through the ordinance process for public engage with their public comment as well.
So are you suggesting that we make a decision about whether we should continue the opt-out?
Yeah, I guess what I'm
Beyond the
trying
sunset?
I'm trying to just kind of gauge where we're at in terms of materials.
Yeah,
I don't want to
make a decision because we're not.
Yeah, we're not. The purpose is here, the purpose of the work session is to have this open public conversation. But what in terms of what staff's looking for is, based on this information, you know, do you want us to spend the time and resources in something that looks like it's not really a viable option for us, or do we want to pursue the ordinance amendment to opt out, which essentially I believe would be just removing the sunset provision that we have currently there. And as Attorney Huff noted, this is still a new thing in Michigan. I think we'll learn some things from that, and I'm sure there'll be changes to legislation going forward. So if things do change and there's an appetite or provisions that allow for a different look at this, that's certainly something that the commission can do at any time. So I think that's important for everyone to know. What we're looking for in terms of, do you guys have other unanswered questions you want us to come back with, or with this information? Should we just prepare some materials and then you guys can dive into those materials as on a formal agenda item for a future meeting?
I would say that makes
Yes, I mean, I would see only really three ways where if we opted in, we would have a marijuana establishment. One would be if the PUD were split up and there was a parcel that fell outside of that zone, right? That would be one. Don't see that as likely. Two would be if we rezoned someplace else in the city to not be a residential district. And three would be if somebody got a non-use variance, or a use variance for their property to allow them to use this. I don't see any of those as worth necessarily the time and effort that city staff would put in, versus, you know, I think Commissioner Walters, you called it an academic exercise to try to figure out where you might fit this into the law.
I think the diagram is pretty cut and dry.
And I would imagine too, when you put together an agenda item in the packet, this map will be a part of that, so everyone who may not be a part of this discussion tonight will see that, and this will be revisited and explained, and it'll be put out there for everyone, so.
And of course, we encourage public input at any point in this process. And, you know, please contact the city or contact your commissioners if you have anything you want to add or any concerns. So.
All right, we're good. All right, great.
Okay, great. So the next item on the work session is discussion of possible vaping ordinance.
This is one that I wanted to bring to your attention, because it's one that I kind of stumbled on when I was making that tobacco change. I looked at the federal law and saw that they included e-cigarettes in their ban, or their 21, not ban, but the 21-year-old regulation. And so the first thing I did was start to call around and see what some of our other communities were doing, and they, like us, really haven't been paying a lot of attention to vaping. I think in part because, as you may recall, when vaping first came in, it was kind of viewed as an alternative to typical cigarettes, and even a thought that maybe it would help people wean themselves off cigarettes. And perhaps it was used for that for some period, but obviously it's kind of taken a turn here where it seems to be used, unfortunately, a lot by younger people, sometimes to their detriment. So all I did when I found out I couldn't steal an ordinance from Kentwood or Walker or any place like that, is I went back to the state law to see what they had, and they basically had 4 major prohibitions that they put in place, basically dealing with sale, possession, or use. And then they also, obviously, had fortunately done a bunch of definitions for us, so we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel there as well, including the definition of tobacco products. So while I'm thinking of it, Commissioner Beck, don't forget it. A tobacco product is a product that contains tobacco, is intended for human consumption, including but not limited to cigarette, non-cigarette, smoking tobacco, smokeless tobacco, as those terms are defined in the state law Tobacco Products Act. It would include almost any kind of tobacco product. But so what I did was, despite the length of the ordinance I gave you, a lot of that is because of things that are not changing. There are 5 new definitions in that first section, 9.51. There's a definition of alternate nicotine product, which is a federal law definition, a definition of liquid nicotine and liquid nicotine container, which are state definitions, and a definition of tobacco product and vapor product. And the vapor product, once again, is a federal definition, of tobacco product is a state law definition. After adding those, we then, I've drafted 4 specific prohibitions that are not currently in our code, because we don't have anything in our code currently about vaping. The first would prohibit sale, giving, or furnishing a vapor product or alternate nicotine product to a person under 21. And that would include through a non-personal contact thing such as a vending machine sale. The next is anybody under the age of 21 trying to purchase or attempt to purchase a vapor product or an alternate nicotine product, and including in that using a false age, such as a stolen driver's license or a made-up driver's license to try and qualify as someone who's 21. That, interestingly enough, the state statute tiers that, and the first couple of things are non-misdemeanors or civil infractions, so that when your 15-year-old goes out and tries to do this and gets caught, he doesn't get a criminal charge. But I think it's either the 3rd or 4th time the person tries it, they figure they're slow learners and they go ahead and change over to a criminal misdemeanor. Then the 2 other sections are, if you're going to be selling these products, you basically, the vapor products, it says, not the other things, but the vapor products need to be in an area that is not accessible to anyone other than employees, or if it's out in a general area, it needs to be within a locked case that an employee is required to get the item out for you. And then the 4th, and I only put this in because I figured you could decide to take out if you didn't care. Liquid nicotine containers are supposed to be in a container that is not normally able to be used by a regular consumer, and so according to what they have there, they have to also have child-resistant covers so that it can't be accessed by a minor, at least not easily accessed by a minor. And I put that in there for you to decide. And frankly, in my opinion, this whole ordinance is for you to decide. I'm not advocating that we do this or not do this, but I did think, when I came upon it, and I know there's been some interest in the schools about trying to increase awareness of this and do things to try and discourage use, that this would maybe something that at least should be on our radar to consider adopting in this fashion or in some modification of this fashion. Once again, I emphasize, all these things are legal for people who are over the age of 21. This ordinance really focuses only on those who are underage.
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Mr. Huff, can you clarify, prior to the passing of the 21-year-old law in December of last year, anyone under 18 was not legally allowed to use vapor products before that even, right?
Right, and because these state laws would have been in place
Right,
at that
and
time.
definitions existed.
Right, yep.
Any other questions or comments?
So I'm just curious, what is the upshot if we don't do anything with this? Because I understand it's illegal under state law.
Right, so we can go back to some of the earlier discussions we've had on other issues. The only thing well, there are two things you're losing there. You're losing local enforcement because there are then state law violations go directly to the county prosecutor, and then you're losing any revenue that is generated by citations because those also primarily bypass the city. But is it still illegal? Yes. Could you still be issued a ticket? Yes.
So it's really just a matter of adopting, the ordinance that we would potentially adopt is the same as what the state has under the state law, it says.
Right.
There's really no deviation.
No, I took freely from the state provisions. I had to rework some of them so they fit our ordinance style, but the content of them is all subject to the state regulations, and I would say these are parallel to those state regulations.
It's definitely about giving our local public safety officers and our city attorney kind of more direct control under our ordinance, as opposed to potentially losing some of that control if we just leave it up to state.
Interestingly enough, one of the ways this came up is that Karen got an inquiry from one of the public safety officers who was checking where the city stood on various things that they were aware of had been changed, like the tobacco age. And one of their questions specifically was, what vaping regulations do we have? And that's one of the other things that caused us to look at this.
And that was a question that we had reached out to some of our neighboring communities from the metro area who also have not addressed this issue at this point in time.
Have we had any thought or conversations with the schools about potentially addressing that issue that Mr. Huff discussed with it, and understanding that vaping is something that schools are looking at, maybe tying it to something that we would do with this, having a community event that would.
I have regular meetings with Dr. Patul, the superintendent, and really in terms of the ordinance we have here, it's, as Attorney Huff noted, there's really no difference between the state statute and local ordinance. So if they contact us, and want us to assist, we can do so under the state law provision or under a local ordinance. So it's more of I think as Attorney Huff noted, it gives us a little more flexibility to deal with that versus the state statute in and of itself. But in terms of their interest, I know that they have an education campaign, and they've done some excellent events around this issue, and certainly it has an impact in the community. But in terms of our ordinance being something that's outside of the bounds of what the state statute is, that's not what this is. So it's really more of a, do we want to have this as a tool for public safety to utilize under our local ordinance or not? And I think that's what we're looking for tonight is Attorney Huff is looking for, do we want to move this forward in that direction, similar to the last item we discussed for an agenda item coming up here to solicit that public comment and feedback from of the community, but on the basis of what the content of the law is, are we codifying this under a local ordinance or not?
I think there was some thought, Commissioner, that, if you did something like this, that, yeah, maybe you do some kind of coordinated effort with the schools to say, look, we're saying as a community, this is something that we don't think should be taking place. And so, this isn't something where I see that they need this to deal with things internally that already have school rules and regulations against most of these things. But it would both buttress and say whether you're on your way to school or you're at school, neither place is a place where you should be doing this, and that's something we've given some priority to say this, needs to stop.
It's like a strong message to those who are selling.
Right.
And that's really where we want to stop it, is selling to.
And that's one other thing I should mention, as I pointed out, I didn't go into some of these areas that are very controversial, such as are flavors going to be banned and what flavors are going to be banned and so forth. You certainly have a right to consider that and do that. I just didn't do that for this draft. It's a very volatile area. It's one, of course, that's causing some of the most pushback from the industry because that's kind of the bread and butter you're getting to now. It's hard for them to come out and say, no, 18-year-olds ought to be doing this or 15-years ought to be doing this. I think they're smarter than that. But when you start talking about you're going to ban a specific product that they make that arguably, if that's what an adult wants to use and get whatever results they get from it, I think you'd find that would get you a bigger fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing here is we're talking about an ordinance that is dealing with selling or otherwise furnishing to somebody. You're not criminalizing under the ordinance the use by a 15-year-old who is experimenting or whatever else. You're not turning that into a crime under the ordinance. You're dealing with that through other means.
Is there any additional information we'd like from Attorney Huff or?
You can think about it and put it back on a future thing. I just knew that we were having the other discussion. I thought this was an opportune time to introduce this issue.
I think the only thing that I would be curious to know is are there any downsides for having us adopt the identical ordinance to the state law? Right now, it sounds like there's just you mentioned two different sort of upsides, right?
Right.
So I don't know what the downside would be.
I don't think that there is one, but I'm happy to give that a little more thought and report back to you.
I mean, I don't know. I suppose somebody who thought it was a dumb law might say, well, we don't want to empower our public safety officers to charge for this or our city attorney to do this. I mean, if you just thought it was a bad law, hit that at the state level, but they would, public safety would still have their rights and obligations to enforce the state law, and the county prosecutor would still have the ability to prosecute under the state law. So even that's, I think, pretty limited in terms of a possible explanation or rationale for why you would.
Another upside, I think, is that the places that are selling, right, potentially to underage members of our community are in our Gaslight Village area and close to our schools. So I think that this is sending an even stronger message to make sure that they're not selling to our kids. So.
Ask one more question, Attorney Huff, related to my definition question previously. So the definition for tobacco product then falls in section 9.51. Does that definition then carry through to section 9.56?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if we don't, let's say we decide not to have on the vapor thing, that's the section we ought to adopt in the definition.
Because right now that definition's not
Right.
there anyway.
It should have been there, it just wasn't.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, all right, so, last but not least, the financial projections update. So are you gonna do that?
Yes, I'm gonna do that. The materials are gonna get passed out here. Okay. So just to give you an update, I'll get started as Karen passes those out. So what I did was I took the questions from that meeting, and there were about 6 questions or 6 topic points that we had discussed, so I'm just bringing back those answers that you had for those questions. The first one, the question was raised about the history of our revenue and expenditures over, 5-10 years. If there was one category that potentially went up. So the first attachment shows all the different categories. I show the buckets of revenues, the buckets of expenditures, 2 different ways. I do it by departments, and then I did it by like a function, by current employees, pension, capital. What this shows is that we're very consistent on where our revenue's coming from and where we're spending our money. There's a couple deviations, a little bit in like public safety, but you need to keep in mind that's where the pension cost is going. And so if you look down on that third bucket, the pension has gone from 4% of our budget to 8% up to like 11%. And so, but within that, everything's very consistent. In 2009, you should also note that there was a large transfer made to do the streets building fund, and so that skewed it a little bit, but overall, everything is very consistent. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If there's no questions on that, I will move on to the next question. The question was, what other municipalities in Kent County are charging the PTAF fee? I received this from Kent County directly. This is what they gave me. But I do know from conversations I've had with other entities, I know there are some separate agreements out there where people have agreements to pay flat fees. For example, I used to work in Cedar Springs, so I know Cedar Springs charged the schools $2,500 to collect their property taxes, but that was paid by the Kent ISD. So I know there's other grandfathered agreements in there, but that's not reflected on this sheet. That was not readily available, but here's the list. Any questions on that? Okay, moving on. The question was to understand when other millages on the tax rolls are rolling off, the other millages on our property
Back
tax
for
bill.
just 1 second.
Yes.
I'm just trying to see the jurisdictions with the summer and the winter. Some of them are listed NA, it's because villages don't collect taxes in the winter, is that why?
Correct.
But otherwise, for any municipality, township, or city that is choosing to charge a PTAF, these are all, it looks like everyone's the same summer and winter, right? People don't choose to vary that.
Yes, correct. Yep. There was a couple other notes where, like Cedar Springs didn't charge on the city's taxes, which is one of the questions we'll get to. I think that question was asked about what that would look like for us. So anyway, attachment number 3 shows when all the different millages are rolling off. We have to pull, it's called an L4026, which gives us all the millages that were authorized to levy. They weren't listed on the schools. It was listed as unlimited, but I was able to pull off their website the date that was on the website. I'm not sure the exact date, but that's the year that it's rolling off. But anyway, there's the list. If it says unlimited, that is just an established, just like ours. Ours would say unlimited for our operating millage. That just continues on. It just keeps rolling back. Does that address the question that was asked?
Yeah, this is really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 4, the question was asked, what would happen if we just stopped paying our required ARC for our pension payments? So I did talk to our financial statement auditor. I just copied from his email what he stated. He said that when he fills out our auditing procedures report, it asks if we've made our payments, and it also gets disclosed to the state if we're not making it. And then he says, according to the auditing procedures report, it's required under the state constitution, Article 9, Section 24. I did look at that particular law. It wasn't really clear to me that that's what it was meant, but that's what is stated when he's checking that box. It does refer to that. And then he also said that if nothing else happens, once we're determined to be underfunded, we'll have to file correction action plans with the state of Michigan. It'll also get posted on our website that we're not making our payments. And so that's what he had. I did ask some other municipalities. They were all kind of like, ooh, I don't know if that's, nobody really wanted to take that around. But I know that's not what we're recommending. So, but I know you guys did ask the question. So. The next question, it was asked, what would be the estimated cost for the assessing and tax collection if we take out the city portion of collecting for city taxes. So what I did was the total estimated cost for assessing and tax collections is about $367. $367 or I can't talk. Sorry, you guys know what I mean. It's right now. Long night.
It's late.
So $367,000. And so all of our tax collections, 70% of those are not city taxes. And so I took that number and multiplied it by 70, which got us down to $256,800. Which if you divide that back out, that would be collecting, instead of the 1% PTAF fee, that would be a 0.725% PTAF. I think that's what you guys were asking for. Get some nods for that. Yeah, answer that question. And I saved the best question for last. So when we had talked last time, we were in the middle of negotiating with MERS to try to get our payment schedule spread. They did, and Karen, do you have the graph? They actually responded better than I thought they would. They have agreed to, and again, we'll have to get this all approved through the city commission, but they have agreed to extend our amortization from our remaining 6 years to 10. It was based on the current assumptions that MERS is using, which is 7.75. I do know when they do the next actuary report, like right now, it's already going down to 7.35. So the data they gave us was already outdated. But they did provide in that extension what it would be at 6.75. So what I did was I updated the graph that you guys are used to seeing. Our current is in red. And then I put in what it would look like under the 7.75 and under the 6.75. The first year, the 2021, that one is the same because that if we accept this by June 30, the agreement that they're gonna write up for us, that one's locked in. As you can see, that's a significant decrease in what our estimated payment would be for the next budget year. So what I did do then, if it's acceptable, again, we'll have to formally approve the agreement, it'll come before the commission, and that was a couple hoops we'll have to jump through to get that. But I did run it through the projections that we had looked at last time, so I don't know, Karen, if you could pull that up.
So looking at 2021, before we go away, looked like it was about a $600,000 roughly smaller contribution for 2021.
Yep, so how that equates to today's dollars is we were looking at about a $300,000 increase from what we're paying now to 2021. And so, yeah, that would have been a swing of about $600,000.
And that's what we were talking about, what we bring in from increased revenue, which doesn't keep pace with our costs for increases for employees, for inflation, for anything. That's where our concern was falling behind. And just want to add that Karen's excellent analysis is really what I think moved the needle with MERS, because she was looking at it for longer term, and I think you couldn't argue with the position that Karen had sent to them. Now I want to caution that we've seen these cliffs before, right? And so you've all seen where these it's 2 more years till this cliff, and then MERS comes back and they always want more money, and the results are always not very good. So so I think what we're trying to share with you is that Karen's been successful in securing a shorter term strategy here for part 1, which is for operational position moving forward in more recent years. The next steps that we're going to get into is we're looking into what it would look like for us to exit the MERS system, so that we could we would have more control over those assets and projections. Because right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. Some of the answers we're getting in terms of what we're making on investment income. We're looking at everything else that's happening in the market. We're not getting the rate of return, and we're not getting very direct answers to how that's happening. And we've already all seen multiple times where they've changed their assumptions and they want all that money now, even though we have these employees that will easily supersede even the projections here. But over time, with what we have for assets, our concern is this really more of a, on the one hand, they'll say you don't want to push your payments out, that's a bad idea. But on the other hand, we're looking at our census and what our population is for retirees. I don't think that that what we have for what we have for our valuation, for our funding, I can see, and that's what Karen had shared with them, is you get to a point where they're all off the plan and we're sitting with millions of dollars. So is it almost a manufactured situation too on the flip side? We are not able to control anything regarding their investments or returns, any of that. That's all part of that system that we joined, I think, in the 1960s, right around there.
There were some agreements back then, I don't know when we actually
Yeah,
joined
so
it, it could have been.
those are the agreements that we've had to go back to. But in terms of the short term, we believe that this to keep you guys updated on what we're looking at for projections and financial stability, that this certainly addresses that in the short term. But moving forward, we're going to be coming to the commission. You'll see some requests for an engagement letter with another law firm that has some experience with, at least no one has gotten out yet, so we may be one of the first ones. The regulation changed in 2018 that actually gives that authority to the city. Previously, under MERS, it actually had to go to a community-wide vote of the community members to vote to exit this retirement system. It should be noted, just to caution anybody who's concerned about any sort of obligations to employees, that's protected under the state constitution, so we have to meet those. Our question is, if we believe that we may be able to make this more sustainable by managing this with an independent financial advisor and the city commission making the decisions and having more control over where investments go and how we're distributed. It appears to us that the successful organizations out there, such as Kent County or Grand Rapids or Zeeland, if you want to look at a smaller community, that have in Kentwood that manage their retirement investments themselves, they all seem to be fully funded or very close to it. And when you're looking in terms of what their census is and how they're funding those, we believe that this will be a better position for the city financially in the long term. So we are going to continue to pursue that. So you'll see additional information coming from us for requests for approval for some of those legal and financial services in the future city commission meetings. But we wanted to share the good news in the short term, and there are no strings attached with, we did clarify that by taking this deal. It's not like we take it, we can't get out. So, but in the short term, this certainly helps us address some of the longer term projections we have, and then for the long term, we believe, although we will verify that, that may be a big piece to the puzzle for long-term sustainability. When we know what that financial projection looks like, that's when I think we can decide what are some of those other options we discussed, whether it's the PTAF or a dedicated millage for capital for parks, or there's other options out there. Some communities have in the past, or I know in the metro area we'll be looking at income tax consideration for more sustainable funding. I don't think, given this information, we're there yet for any of those, but we wanted to give you a kind of a look at where we're at with the retirement piece, which we feel we're making some headway on.
Are those other communities that you mentioned that are fully funded, are their plans closed like ours?
I don't believe so. It's possible.
I know that.
Well, that changes it too. It changes it too. If they are still open, they definitely look better than we do. But I think most places are now closed to new hires. I don't know that.
I mean, the county's not. I know that. In Grand Rapids, it depends on what bargaining you're talking about. But
for our community, it's better. We're closed, so right. Then that in the short term, that's going to be we have to.
That's where you get the actuarial science of things, which can be very complicated. But we closed the defined benefit plan in 1999, and we have very few people that are existing employees that are still.
We have 4 current employees that are still on the plan. We have 60-some retirees on it. But just for a point of reference, and I think we talked about this last time, in 20 years, we will only have 11 retirees on the plan that are under the age of 90. And so we're getting very close. And I made that argument to MERS along with just showing them a cash flow projection, saying if we put this much in and earn this much, we should be able to maintain this to get through it. But that left us with almost $9 million in 20 years. What do you mean $9 million?
And that's what I was talking about. You don't want to reduce services or raise taxes or other things if, in the end of the day, you end up with a balance of funds there. So it's different ways of looking at it. As Karen noted, as our population, retiree population is aged at the end there, I hope everyone looks to be 150. I just don't see that as a possibility. So we don't want to be sitting with millions of dollars there and having to reduce services to our community in the meantime. So that's the very powerful piece that Karen got down to. And I'll say that that's not something that they, I would say, is very common for them to do. So
Yeah, because Granville went to the same exercise. They went to the same exercise and they dropped their payments like $100,000. They did it a couple of years. Granville's plan looks very identical to ours, and they only dropped it by $100,000. And the problem, and Granville can't go back now because when you sign the agreement, it's like a one-time only extension. So Granville stuck, but I showed it to Granville, and she was like, we only got dropped by $100,000 a year, and it didn't really make much of a difference. But they couldn't argue with what I sent them. But
Thank you, Karen, for doing all this.
so this will be, and I'm going to show you what the projections update, but since we're talking about the MERS piece, I'll just finish up. And so Doug briefly talked about the attorney that we met with. There will be, like I said, we're hoping the next meeting, just an engagement letter just to, so we can work with them more directly because they've provided us with a lot of good information. But the steps that we need to go through before we can even start having the public hearings and doing some of that is looking at the investment advisor and actuary are the two big ones, because what they're gonna show is if it makes sense to get out. Like, they'll be able to show us what our new payments will look like. And then we have to evaluate that and say, yeah, that looks way better than what we have, or maybe the cost to do it ourselves may outweigh the benefit. But we need to do that just to take a look at it.
Yeah, this is a no-brainer option for us, obviously, to pursue this path in terms of what we'll find out, what those costs will be, long-term projections will be. That's where this may be a solid piece for sustainability in the long term without having any additional revenue items in terms of funding our operations and capital. But if it's not, as Karen noted, once we have that, once we've gone through that exercise to look at that financial to see if it makes sense for us, it'd be great if it does, and we hope and we believe it will. But if it's not, then that's where we can come back and we regroup with some of the other options for revenue in terms of PTAF and other things. So we're on a good path, and Karen's done an excellent job of really digging into this. And as she noted, we'll be coming back to you guys with authorization to continue moving that path so we can actually know the facts and that determination.
Right. Yeah. Because one more note too, when we're in MERS, we're grouped in with open plans, we're grouped in with plans that only closed 5 years ago. They're making investment decisions not based on like where we're at versus where everybody else is at. So all the assumptions, everything's applied across the board to everybody the same. They're not considering the fact that we're a mature plan. And so that will help. What we're hoping for based on the new projections they gave us, that it got us more excited to say this is viable. Because now, even though MERS has reduced their payments, that makes it think like, you know what, we probably have a little bit more leeway there too. Because we weren't expecting them to give us that much. But
Didn't think it'd be that dramatic.
yeah, we didn't think it'd be that dramatic.
We're encouraged by that.
Yep. And so this next graph, I put the forecast at the 6.75, except for the first year, because we know that one's locked in. 6.75 is a little bit less than what we know they're going to, but again, I'd rather do worst case scenario. And then this would be all the capital needs that are outlined in that capital book, which did include about $800,000 of capital. And so as you can see, this definitely is a nice short-term fix to get us through fixing the rest of the pension and deciding what we're going to do with our future. So this definitely helps compared to what we were looking at the last time we sat down and looked at this.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, thank you, Karen, for doing that.
Karen, as we get closer to having more concrete numbers about the potential for moving out of MERS, something that would be interesting to me would be kind of the net payments on each of these updated MERS payments from 2021 to 2031. Because we see, there's a nice drop off in 2021, right? That's $600,000. But then there is a substantial difference as we get to 2027 as well. So, and I know that it does put us in a great position short term, and I think in the long term as well. I just love to see those numbers.
Okay, you just want to see the hard
Yep, just
numbers,
the
yeah,
numbers.
and I have those because I need
figured
those to
you
do the
created
graph.
the graph,
So we can get those set up.
Yep.
Thank you very much, and thank you for getting that good result. Really good. So, all right, so that's it, I believe. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for your patience, and the meeting is adjourned.
Just email it to Karen.
That was fun, and I did not enjoy it.
Yep, just make sure.
I thought it was going to be like 45 minutes.
I emailed it out, so